Hey everyone, I'm Dexter Wimberly. I want to welcome you to today's open air conversation hosted by the Harvey B. Gantt Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. Today we're joined by artist Odili Donald Odita. And I would love to just give you a brief bio on, I'm just going to refer to him as Odita. um, uh, Odili Donald Odita was born in Enugu, Nigeria, and lives and works in Philadelphia. Odita is an abstract painter exploring color both in the figurative historical context and the socio-political sense. For Odita, color is at once a distinct phenomenon and vehicle for mirroring the complexity of the world. He has exhibited nationally and internationally in museums and art institutions, including Beyond the Surface at the Nasher Museum of Art at Duke University, Every Day, selections from the collection Baltimore Museum of Art, Black Refractions, highlights from the Studio Museum in Harlem, Prospect 4, the Lotus in Spite of the Swamp, and the Philadelphia Museum of Art, among others. Odita is a professor in painting, drawing, and sculpture at the Tyler School of Art and Architecture at Temple University and is represented by the Jack Shaman Gallery in New York City, and David Kordansky Gallery in Los Angeles, and the Stevenson Gallery in Cape Town. His most recent exhibitions and current exhibition were Burning Cross at Jack Shaman Gallery in New York City and Windows at Stevenson Gallery in Amsterdam. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Odita to the conversation.
Hello.
How are
Hi,
you?
Dexter. How are you? I'm good. I'm
I'm
good.
good.
I'm broadcast. There is a bit of a delay, so I'm going to speak and then finish and then let you speak again after me. I'm here in Amsterdam currently. I thought there was a 6 hour difference. Quickly found out right before signing on air that there's a 5 hour difference, but I'm here. It's midnight in Amsterdam.
Well, we are definitely on opposite sides of the globe. I am in Japan, so it's 8 a.m. in the morning here, and couldn't be further apart in terms of time. But thank
That's
you
amazing.
for joining us. It's such a late hour, and hopefully today's conversation will be lively and it'll keep you engaged. So let's start in reverse. You're in Amsterdam now. You have a show that recently opened. I'd love to just hear a little bit about your experience in Amsterdam and tell us a bit about this current exhibition.
Yes, thank you. I've been in Amsterdam before. The first time was in 2004 at the Thami Manieli Foundation residency. It was a residency for African artists. It's still ongoing, and they have a lot of different programming here for this. Um, I came here subsequently a year later, and I've done a number of exhibition projects here in Amsterdam. But this is my first solo exhibition with the Stevenson Gallery Post in Amsterdam. It's a smaller show of a series of small works, small scale works. I've had a great reception, positive experience so far with the show, and I just love the cultural moment that's happening here in Amsterdam. A colleague friend of mine, Remy Youngerman, was featured widely at the Stedelijk Museum. Very important because he's a Surinamian uh, artist, and he was given this scope, this big scope here at the museum, and also represented the country, I believe, in 2019 at the Venice Biennale. Yeah. So there's a lot of
Thank,
cultural mix happening.
thank you, thank you. You mentioned the term cultural moment. I'd love to hear more about what you mean by that. Like, what are you feeling is inspiring this cultural moment, and maybe you can just expound on that a little bit.
Well, I think that it has a lot to do with just the way in which the art world has uh, embraced a greater sense of diversity. There are a lot more artists of color, uh, people of color being exposed in the art world, not only historical figures, living historical figures, figures that have passed away, but currently there are a great number of artists from, let's say, the continent of Africa, other places around the world where their viewpoint, their work, their image, their voice might not have been well represented. I think that there's a greater sense of that happening, and of course, It should increase. It should maintain as much as increase. It should maintain and consistently build. But we're seeing something that's really happening in a very diverse way that's cognizant of all that contribute to culture worldwide.
Thank you. I've been aware of your work for a very long time, and it's fantastic to see the evolution, not of the work, but just the evolution of your visibility and your career, and how I think the things you've been doing are coming to light. It's interesting in the art world, people start hearing about artists and they think that things have just happened, but you've been working for years, like doing this work, doing the hard work for years and building your career. It's also quite coincidental. I curated an exhibition in Dallas at the Green Family Art Foundation recently, Black Abstractionists from then to now, a show that included 38 artists, really almost a century worth of artwork. And you were one of the artists in that show. And I think that was another example of institutions, but also the public in general, really coming to more of awareness of the significance of abstract painters, particularly artists of color in general, artists from the diaspora. I'd love to just talk a little bit about the influences behind your work. You're an abstract painter, and obviously there's a long sort of like Western history of abstraction, but your work is not just inspired by this sort of like European Western history of abstraction. I'd love to talk a little bit more about what your work is inspired by. Like what drives you? What are the sources that you're pulling from? What are you thinking about when you're engaging with making a painting?
Yeah, and first of all, I was very happy to be in your exhibition that was at the Green Family Art Foundation in Dallas. It was an honor to be in that show because a lot of the work that you had in that show, I saw maybe, you know, nearly 30 years ago at Kenkeleba Gallery, or I learned about that work through working at the Kenkeleba Gallery in New York City. That was work that I had to basically have the good fortune of being on staff there to have access to it because I didn't know a thing about those artists going through undergraduate and graduate school in the States. It took my being at this place to see and then meet some of those artists, in fact, during that time when I found out about them. So it's a great lineage that you had in that exhibition. And really, I'm coming from that source. That is the source from which I feel like you can say that that's a conceptual family. And I didn't study that source in school, but I understood that source living in New York, going to New York, living in Brooklyn, spending time in Manhattan, and just experiencing my own place in the art world alongside understanding those artists and what they experienced, the ups and downs, and particularly hearing a lot about the downs in the art world through their stories that they shared with me. I have, I would say, a diverse sense of history in the sense that my father, first of all, was an artist who became an art historian. He was the first. He is the first Black Africanist in the United States. In the United States, teaching at Ohio State University, working with the first Africanist as a student at Indiana University with the professor Roy Siebert. So he founded the history of African art and archaeology program at the Ohio State University, and his paintings, growing up around them, were a great influence to me. Just the way I would see and sense his shapes, his figurative paintings, and how he was dealing with a kind of a fragmentation and a kind of cubist form building in his paintings. But I also had different art books in the house that I would look at on a lot of occasions: Picasso, Miro, Rembrandt, Michelangelo, this sort of thing. I loved comic books. I remember looking at early work of what would be the artist Jack Kirby, the Thor, Fantastic Four, the Incredible Hulk, this sort of thing, wanting to copy and draw those kind of characters. Later on, it was an illustrator like Frank Frazetta and so forth. I was interested in fashion photography, um, interested in so many different things as I was growing up. Um, and that expanded. Going into art school, I was doing sculpture, and then I went into painting. And I was thinking about this when today I was at the Stedelijk Museum, and I was looking at a lot of conceptual art, and I realized that, I mean, I loved conceptual art as a undergraduate student because it was so logical and it was so well mapped out. I was able to just kind of like get it in ways that I wasn't able to understand a lot of things in Western painting. But I soon to grow to love artists like Jackson Pollock, of course, Philip
Right.
Guston. Uh, Later on, artists like Ellsworth Kelly and Bryce Martin. Um, you know, and then it would expand even further as I started to really research abstraction and go into that sort of space, thinking about that and its possibilities. But the artists that I can think of that were inspiring to me, it's essentially almost endless.
Right, right. I totally understand. I want to talk a bit about the recent exhibition at Jack Shaman Gallery. The show's titled "Burning Cross," which as an African American immediately conjures a very specific imagery. And the
Mhm.
description of the show, I want to just for the sake of our audience, just read a couple of sentences. It says the premise of this exhibition stems from the idea of trust or the lack thereof in American life. There are many reasons and circumstances in the last few years that can be cited for this lack of trust. White nationalism, anti Semitic rhetoric, anti Asian street attacks, sanctioned police brutality, the institutional persecution of LGBTQ persons and their families, as well as the recent propagandist actions such as the movement of entire migrant families via private jet to various sanctuary cities throughout America. So you're talking about a lot of very heavy issues um,
Mhm.
in this show. And as an abstract painter, what's interesting to me is how you're using abstract work to explore these complex socio-political issues. And I just love to hear a bit about that, like what, conceptually, how you're approaching that, and also like why Burning Cross? Like like what brought you to that moment?
Right. Well, in that particular painting, when it was done, and I was going to title it something else, I was focused on the red, black, and green of the color formation that was happening in the painting, using the red and the green on the black wood panel to create this red, black, and green structure. I was thinking about the Afro comb, with the black fist in that kind of pointing of these teeth that were coming into the painting. And then on the other diagonal was just basically like this star color, this yellow color, starlight color, that in the total formation reminded me of a throwing star. So the painting was going to be called Black Fist Throwing Star for the longest time, until at the very end of the painting process, I saw this cross in the middle of the painting, the way in which all the sections came together. I saw this cross, just very similar to, say, this painting, where you can see, in a certain sense, just the nature of the way it's formed. There's a cross in here, all right? So that cross in that painting, the way it looked like it was backlit, as if it was a cross on, say, a hillside or something, and you could see it at night, flaming at night. And to me, there were so many metaphors that were going on with that painting, because I saw it as a cross, like might understand a cross, as a symbol of trust, as a symbol of faith, having faith and trust in it. But this cross is on fire. And I was reflecting on, as we might do as painters, as artists, we're going through our intellectual and emotional process of our daily living, our world, what we're thinking about, what we're experiencing, what we're dealing with. And those things that you mentioned in my statement are a lot of the things I'm thinking about constantly, in the sense of, this is where I live. I live in this place where we're seeing propaganda and delusion, and we're seeing manipulation and false fake news and stories to persuade masses to uprise when they are basically burning the things that they own themselves. So it's like, what's all this about? And when I saw that symbol in that represented in this painting, this cross on fire, essentially, it came to me like a hammer to the nail. Like, this painting is speaking about things that I'm internalizing, and I can understand what I'm going through by seeing what I have here. And that is an interesting thing when art can do that for you, when it can crystallize, in a way, synthesize everything you are feeling, thinking, doing, being, living through all at once, as that painting did. And from there, I was able to really focus on the elements I wanted to bring together in that show, Burning Cross.
Thank you. And we mentioned earlier in our conversation, you're in Amsterdam, I'm in another country, and travel, I think, has a profound impact on how we see the world. And I'd love
Yeah.
to sort of explore that with you a bit as well. I mean, how has travel impacted your work? You were born in Nigeria. You currently live in Philadelphia. You mentioned living in New York. You said your dad taught at Ohio State. Was Ohio State? So there's been
Yes.
some movement going on here.
Yes. Yes.
um,
Yes. Yes.
can you kind of like timeline that a little bit for us? Like when were you where, and how that might have impacted your work and the way you think about being an artist?
Yes. My father and mother moved to um, Iowa, and then were there at the University of Iowa as students there. Then they moved to Indianapolis. This is all after the start of the Biafran War in the mid '60s, and then they moved to Indianapolis, or rather Bloomington, Indiana, where they finished degrees there. And then from there, they went to Columbus, Ohio, where my dad started. But this is by 1970. Started his practice as an art professor at Ohio State University. And I grew up there up until going through Ohio State as an undergraduate. And then I moved to, in 1988, to Bennington College to go be there as a graduate student for 2 years. And in 1990, I moved to New York City. And from there, I began my practice as a painter, holding many different jobs until essentially becoming a professor full time in 2000, and moving to Florida, where I was at the Florida State University for 6 years in 2006, continuing teaching at the Tyler School of Art and Architecture from 2006 to current time now. In all of that, I've done a lot of traveling around the world, and I can say that what the best thing that travel does is open our horizons. It has helped me to be able to see the world in a way in which I can relax, actually, with my expectations of
Mm.
I what is expected of me, or what I can expect of myself, by seeing so many different examples of a particular thing, or of most things. It gives you this sensibility that you can be more of the person you want to be, or capable of being. And that is a great thing. I mean, travel broadens the horizons. It allows you to see so many different examples of things that can simply enrich your life if you're open to those choices you can make, the many choices you can have in your plate for you to just work through, choose from, and so on.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. It's interesting. I had a conversation with someone recently about this. Being an African American, being, uh, you know, American, being a New Yorker, all these things that I carry with me. You almost become boxed in a way when you don't look at the rest of the world. Like being out of the country has given me perspective that it's difficult to have when you're in the midst of it every day. And I become more and more of myself, I think, every day, because I'm not necessarily carrying all of the same things that I had to sort of like carry and deal with every single day. There's still, there's still things to carry and deal with. Don't get me wrong, but it's a
Yes.
different a different set of things. You mentioned getting to New York around 1990, and starting your practice, and I'd love to sort of talk to artists that may be watching this today or watch this in the future who are just kind of getting started, who may be struggling in different ways, trying to stay focused on building their career. Um, what would you say to a young artist, whether they're black artists, doesn't really matter, like a young artist who is trying to figure out, how to stay focused and how to be taken seriously. I know that, for example, just to kind of be more specific with my question, there are a lot of young artists that struggle with this idea. Am I going to be taken seriously if I also am working another job? Do I need to be a full-time artist in my studio every day? If my painting isn't paying all my bills, will people say that I'm not a success? All these kinds of psychological challenges that I think, not just artists, but a lot of creative people come up against. Um, as a teacher, I'm sure you've also been asked some of these questions too.
Right.
I'd love
Right.
to just get your take on that, more like career-oriented advice and thoughts from your own experience.
Absolutely. I think this when there's a lot that you can learn in art school. It's really important to not underestimate art school and the ways in which it finishes your intellectual understanding, your practice in the sense of making hand with your hands, technique, the history of technique, and all that sort of thing. It's very important what school can provide you. It provides a certain kind of centering when you think about your artistic heart, your values, and the heart of their practice. Um, what I've experienced working in the art world, let's say, and I'm going to talk about the art world not in the sense of only marketplace, but just being an artist in your studio, not being supported by other things than, say, your practice itself. Uh, there are so many things that you will experience as an artist working out there that can't and are not taught to you in school. Okay, you are going to experience the conditions of necessity, market, reputation, the ethics and equity of a well maintained practice, well maintained studio, efficiency, time management, an understanding of materials relative to inventory, time, quantity, expiration date, these kinds of things. You're going to be able to hopefully master a schedule so that you'll be able to maintain the demands of the market and, say, art fairs, exhibitions, group exhibitions, solo exhibitions. And on top of it, an artist has to be wise enough to know that they should also hold work back if they can for themselves against the future. Artists may be able to, let's say, produce a large body of work and sell a large body of work. And then when it comes to having something from a period in time, let's say 5, 10, 15, 20 years back, and they've sold all of that and they watch the collector benefit from auction prices or just the benefit from the hard work you're putting into your practice, and you cannot because you gave up all of your own stock, let's say, in the frenzy of selling or the frenzy of showing, then you realize that you have only yourself to produce more at a given time without any reserves. Imagine running and investing without putting savings in your savings account, and then wanting to draw on a savings account, but you have none, only but your own body. And when you're 30 versus being 60 years old, those are two different points in time when you're making a new body of work. So there's all sorts of wisdom that you can gain, that I've gained actually working out there outside of like the academy. That even while I'm in the academy, I'm seeing that we're not teaching students these things. But it's to say that the things that you do learn again, the context of making things and understanding the placement of those things within history, that's the beginning. You can't be somebody who is inventing work and just presenting objects in a marketplace and think that that's going to sustain itself. You have to have a sense of being able to change, to edit your work, to critique your work, to amend your work, to transform your work, to adjust it to the times in the sense of how are you living in the world. It doesn't mean that you make a new thing tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, but you in the inside have to be new and fresh to the moment called now. And now and now and now and now and now, and the future is always now, moving forward.
Wow. That may have been the best answer to that question I could have imagined. Oh man, thank you for that. We have some images of your work that I'd love to share and talk about your technique and some of the content with greater specificity. So I'll let the magicians behind the scenes here start that presentation. So what we're looking at now is a work called Walls of Change 2021. So this is, I'll let you obviously talk about it, but this is a very large mural, 128 feet.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and I think if I recall correctly, I think that's the first time I've actually engaged with your work. I think I saw a permanent or semi-permanent installation somewhere. And can you talk a little bit about balancing making more traditional paintings on canvas or panel versus these large scale, almost like public project scale works?
Yes, yes. I mean, definitely, the work is coming from my studio. It's coming from, drawing, from pencil drawing on graph paper. It's really on one level an intimate practice where I'm just drawing and experiencing different dimensions of space, and then thinking and going through the process of applying color to that kind of space that I'm drawing from. The canvas, all the work is really different and specific to its structure. That's something, again, in art school, those are the kind of things you learn, or over time you can teach yourself, but art school gives you the ability to be able to examine it against history. So you're learning, you can always teach yourself stuff, but the history part is always one of the hardest things. And when you have guidance with the history, you're able to then place things more concretely and understand the effects of them within society in a better way. So with this work, in fact, I'm thinking a lot about, I was looking in fact at groupings, social groupings, social structures, and the groupings and social structures I was looking at were images of protest, images of body
Mm.
in protest, let's say on the museum steps or in the streets, protesting George Floyd at the time, protesting police brutality at the time, protesting social engagement, equity, and the idea of wanting better housing for different communities. Let's say that's the kinds of things I was looking at. And in these protest formations, I was thinking about the idea of clusters and groupings, and then also the idea of focusing in on those groupings as bodies, massive bodies within the space, and then focusing out on them. So sparseness, closeness, fullness, and so on. And so in this case, I was using that notion to create these structures or rhythms or ribbons within the painting that were, in a way, like I would almost call it like a musical score, a dance score across the span of this wall. And in the case of this installation, it is both walls. That's just one side of the installation. If you look, if we had it, we would have an image of another wall opposite that, facing that also had another formation of painting that was a different rhythm to what we have here in this side of the wall. So it was an experience of walking through this tunnel and experiencing light from the window with the paintings between the windows, and then this formation of crowd cluster on the other side.
You mentioned the word, I Totally. And it's funny, you mentioned the word rhythm a couple of times, and the first thing that came to mind when I saw this work is this sense of melody, the sense of movement, and just kind of
Mhm.
switching gears for one moment. In that same vein about rhythm and music, how has music influenced your work? I imagine it has. Is there
It absolutely
any influ like yeah, talk about that a bit.
it absolutely has, absolutely has. I've loved music ever since I was a kid, and it's interesting. I sometimes call myself, as a joke, the failed musician that became a painter. I have to say that I love music for the way in which which I am able to understand space. And painting is really the same kind of exploration of the same thing, of space. So when I'm hearing music, I'm listening to the structuring of spaces. However, you can imagine a space in the mind when you close your eyes. This is the way in which I'm hearing music make form or become form, atmosphere, emotion, psychology, all of these things. And it has meaning and power in the sense of being part of a social space. It could be protest music, it can be joyous music, it could be funerary music. It has so many different kinds of effects. And so for me, listening to music has helped me to understand how to think of the structuring of, say, a beginning and an end within a painting, or the idea of where can color transform and fuse to create a tempo of shimmer or loud noise or rupture of the space or the mellowing out to a fade out of a space. So the ways in which, in the terms in which I might speak of music, I'm thinking about that with color and drawing all together within a canvas work.
It's entirely possible that I'm a failed musician that became a curator, but we won't talk about that today. um, let's go to the next image.
Yes.
Um,
Black. Yeah.
sure, if you can share something about this
Yeah.
work, that would be great.
Yeah, it's really actually was interesting for me. This code's called Blackbird, and the title is very important for me because I wanted to play with this term black in the relation to this space of color, where you might not see black at all. In fact, the darker space is a kind of purple brown that is almost like a reptile or like a shimmery kind of texture to it. And that's the wood panel, that's the wood grain. The brown, purple, velvet kind of space is the wood grain. And then I have this bifurcated, this image that's almost like a V, but in a way like when kids draw birds, like kids might draw birds with like this and this kind of thing. That's in my way,
Hmm.
that imagery there is sort of like the power of a bird or something flying. And but in the case of this painting, it's with the brown there, it's almost like a bar like a jail cell or a bar blocking the full display of the bird, or what I would call the bird. So there's this kind of iteration that comes from the title and the song. One might refer to the Beatles song Blackbird, which was made out of reflection on their seeing protest at the time in the 60s, because that song that is a reflection on African American protest during the civil rights era. So there's that kind of association, and with this painting as well, I'm thinking of the ways in which those bars, despite them, there's this flourishing or powerful color radiation, this symbol that's coming forward and going forward or just present in this space. So there's all this kind of um, history and narrative that I'm bringing into this abstract space, or I'm thinking about as I'm making this painting that is called Blackbird. And it could be anything that anybody wants to make of it, but that's how I constructed it. Those are the thoughts I had in constructing this space.
Did you experience any shift in the approach to your work in the past like 3 or 4 years? And the world the world has always been unpredictable, and certainly you live long enough, you see all sorts of things. But has there been any noticeable shift in your mind in terms of how you think about your work in the past 3 or 4 years, considering the pandemic, considering some of the other issues that you've brought up, considering the last presidency in the United States? I mean, all sorts of crazy things in the zeitgeist. Or do you feel like you've been on this path long and now the times are just sort of like reflecting more of the things you've already been thinking about?
I've actually been on this path for a long time, long before this, and particularly with. I have a new catalog out of my work for the past 30 years, and it really explores all the different contexts I've engaged, all the different kind of work formats I've worked through, from photo-based work up until the paintings I do on the walls and on wood panels. But I can say that the work crystallized definitely going through the last presidency and what we've experienced afterwards. It was quite a shock for me and most people, I guess, worldwide, to have that kind of a presidency and to have a kind of a situation where you're seeing fascism full out and full stop. And not only something that was endemic to America, but that was growing worldwide. That was kind of a trend internationally. And so, with this situation that we went through, it was not only just, oh, I hate that, that's bad, I'm pointing at it like, oh, that's just bad. It wasn't like that. It became personal because I know that my family left Nigeria as essentially refugees, were accepted into the United States of America with welcome open arms in that time frame of the 1960s. Mind you, all the political unrest that's going on in the 60s, but they were
Right.
still welcomed by the university communities, and they were welcome as new people, bright people, as college students and as university students and as bright, hopeful engineering people into the United States. And then when this guy, the last president, is speaking in a way that's very foul mouthed to people coming to this country that want to give to the country, that are working and are able bodied and intelligent and fortuitous and so forth. And they're spoken about like, oh, there's, excuse my language, but shithole countries and so forth, for example, and other kinds of rhetoric like this, and then blocked by laws that they were making to block families or to separate families and all the other gross atrocities that they were doing. I'm thinking, oh my God, I wouldn't have had the experience of producing, of being a college professor, of paying taxes and being prosperous in this country like every other person that you could imagine would be able to come here and do the same thing under the guidelines of on those principles of what America is supposed to be. This land of prosperity and the possibility for you to work hard and do these things here, as my parents did. So I'm looking at it and it was like, oh my goodness, this is
Hmm.
real. There could be a world where we could be thrown back in a sour state again by law, let alone by bad sense of values and prejudice, but by also law, and that was shocking. And then the rest of it came afterwards in the pandemic, and seeing how those policies led to millions of people dying worldwide.
Right, right. Wow. Yeah, absolutely true. Absolutely true. And I'm someone who is really interested in studying history. I've never made a profession of it. It's just something that I'm personally interested in. And I think it has affected my personality in such a profound way because if you think about what was going on in the world in the 1930s, and you really understand it, and you see these parallels, it's so frightening.
Exactly.
It's so frightening
Exactly.
to see
Exactly.
how what a destabilized world can lead to very quickly,
Right.
like very, very quickly.
Very.
Let's advance to the next image so that we can stay on track with time. And also, After you talk about this image, I want to hear a little bit more about the show in Amsterdam. So let's do that.
Yes, this is called Night Crossing. This piece, I'm thinking about many things. In this work, in fact, the wood panel work, it's very close in my mind to my drawing or to drawing itself. What I'm dealing with is a sense of, like, say, counterpoint. Musical term could be counterpoint. I'm bringing opposing or differentiating rhythms, differentiating sources into one space, and I'm doing a certain kind of call and response that I think it's closest thing to my love of improvisation or improvisational music, where I'm doing a dance with what I'm seeing, i.e., hearing. And in the case of the wood grain, was seeing color. I was seeing a certain kind of nocturnal space, and then I imagined it in the American context of things. And I was thinking about the idea of crossing some space, some terrain, some difficult terrain at night. And then I was thinking of literally like of Underground Railroad and things like this, but also I'm thinking of like crossing rivers,
Mm.
crossing tough ground, crossing oceans. However, getting from point A to point B, and this kind of sense of 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 the nocturne and what that might imply in the mind. And in another level, aesthetically, I'm thinking about the coloration of that grain and how that helped me to influence the colors I used to place on top of the painting, borrowing from a certain kind of value context within the wood, in as much as borrowing from the kind of chromatic color tension I might have in the sense of what can respond to this space in a way that illuminates in as much as blends in. So it's a lot of things going on, but this is what I'm dealing with these kinds of surfaces. There's a lot of play and a lot of chance in the way that I'm dealing with this. And in Amsterdam, I'm borrowing this form in this painting, in fact, in a number of the paintings here that are engaging space in a different way. And what I'm dealing with in this show really is more or less an idea of light and the way in which light can transform in an atmospheric sense, quality and sense, and how light transforms in that same sense of light can transform the mind and the soul in a way in which we are maybe in equilibrium to a space where our emotional and observational sense are coincide and can coincide. I'm thinking of serialization in the sense of what if we split time and triple time or quadruple time in the sense of not necessarily speed, but the idea of being able to understand the multiple selves within the multiple sense of self within a singular location.
Thank you. Thank you. We have about 8 images in total. Let's advance to the next image so that we can stay on track with time. And so this is the work you spoke of earlier, I believe. Did you study color in school? Was that and that's probably not the right terminology, but
No,
did you
that's fine. That's
go
fine.
deep into studying color?
Yes, that's exactly fine. Yeah, I studied color like a normal student would who needed to study it to get that grade and to pass my uh, program. I had to take this color class, which I didn't want to take. I saved it until the very last semester as an undergraduate at Ohio State University, and because, like most students, because I teach this course now, and I know how terrifying it is to a lot of students because they just don't understand color when they first get into it. But I tried to teach it as I learned it in a way that it became an intuitive thing and I understood it internally. And through my own way of seeing color, I began to understand it better. And so, yes, I took this color class, but that color class is just the beginning. Like the way I teach it, it's just the beginning. Really, it's how you explore it that becomes the way in which it has power and importance in each individual artist. So yeah, I'm bringing color to a certain way for my work. Color is something I love. I just can't even explain or express enough where it might come from. But I knew that I grew up in a very funky house with great wallpaper, African art, super crazy rugs, all sorts of decorative objects, and great music. playing and West African food being cooked in the kitchen. So there was a lot of color on many different levels in the space that I grew up in, and traveling had a little bit of help in there too. So for me, it's just an exploration of the norm in the most fantastic way possible, making color become real.
Wonderful, wonderful. Let's advance to the next image, and I have another question for you. What are some of the? I definitely want to talk about this work, but I also want to hear what are some of the things you have in the works, because I have a sense you have a lot of things going on at once, like other great
Yeah,
projects coming up.
yeah, I do. There are a number of things I'm working. This show comes right after my show in New York City at the Jack Shaman Gallery, Burning Cross. This show is called Windows here in Amsterdam. I'm working toward my next one-person exhibition in Los Angeles at the David Kordansky Gallery in November. I have another show coming up at the Abraham Center at the University of Birmingham in Alabama, and this show is going to be in November 2024. And then in between, works and art fairs and so forth. And there are many other projects that I can't actually speak about until they're fully formed. But it's the fact that my practice is a busy practice, and there's health in that for me, in the sense of making work, and making work not in an exhaustive sense, because I schedule myself better now with the way that I'm structuring my studio. But making work helps one to become a better artist, and it helps one to stay sharp within the practice and the game of the practice, in the sense of being able to be alert to all the different things that you can be alert to. Looking also, the traveling helps me because I'm experiencing things in different ways. In fact, again, being at this museum that I was at today, the Stedelijk Museum, I was able to go through their collection, and it was reframing a lot of historical artifacts in a way that was not, say, from an American voice. A lot of American historical artifacts of the 20th century into the 21st century in a way that was not a story told from an American voice. So I was able to actually kind of look at some objects and some things in a new way, and that was very enlightening. So not only being an artist with a busy schedule, but having the opportunity to go to different places, I can give myself or allow myself the time to reflect on things that only can help, being able to allow myself to do that, to let that stuff help me.
Wow, great. What can you share about this particular painting, Represent?
Represent was the title itself is very important, because in a way I feel like this is drawing much directly to somewhat to not only to my father's paintings, but to the space of, I look at it as like the wall of ancestors with their voices echoing forward. So for me, this painting Represent says to the world, or it says to this space, that you are part of the present day. You are represented. You represent me. You are represented here now. It is like a representation of ancestry, let's say, in this particular sense. The structure is coming from my love and interest in textile strip cloth, Nigerian strip cloth in particular, and I'm using shapes that are broken and more freeform, related to some of the earlier work, but more broken and freeform, to be able to explore light, color, and form and surface in ways in which I am pushing the eye and the sense of surface from one side to the other side in this constant flow of light and energy.
Fantastic, fantastic. And you mentioned textiles, and I'm I'm glad you did, because I wanted to explore a little bit about how textiles may have influenced your work or continue to influence your work. So I'm glad you
Yes.
brought that up. Let's advance to the next image. We're down to our final like 7 or 8 minutes here, so I could talk to you all day, and I will do that another day in person. Um,
That's no. I would love. Yeah,
So this is
this
another
painting.
recent work, Restart. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, this painting restart. There's quite a few things that I could address. There was this idea I wanted to think about. This idea. There's a couple of things happening in this painting, and at a certain level, and personally, I'm thinking about restarting or restoring and repair, rejoicing. These things that were part of a, there's a lot of dialogue about how does one restore oneself after trauma, or how could one engage the traumatized self, the exhausted self, and recharge it again. And so I was thinking about that in the way in which I was creating this kind of space with this type of figure. And the figure could be, in essence, any one of these color bars, but there were a couple of color bars, and specifically the reddish ones that we see as a certain kind of reflection on, say, a body in space A and then a body in space B, and the transformation of the body in space A from space B by what is surrounding it, by the atmosphere that surrounds it, the atmosphere in one section or structure of the painting, and the atmosphere in the other structure and other space of the painting. So restart became a certain kind of like literal examination of what happens to this element in different spaces, different color space. But psychologically and conceptually, I'm also thinking about myself coming back to a certain type of painting, or even a certain nature of painting, where this color field is actually becoming expanded in this expressionistic sort of way in which and I don't mean expressionism in the sense of the gestural sense of paint, but I mean expressionism in the sense of the way in which a color creates this expansive sense of field. And I was thinking about that and my relationship to this type of history through what I had to deal with and work through in school, and think through in school, and how I'm engaging it now in the way that I want to engage the world as a painter in a more open-ended, but in a certain sense, a specific way through color, drawing, and a conscious sense of self in the sense of my own history and place in the world as an African. Actually, Dexter, I'm not hearing you anymore.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Let's
Okay.
advance to the next image, and we
Right.
have a question that came in from the audience. The person said, "You're so generous. Can you please share the name of the Surinamese artist that you mentioned before?"
Yes, Remy Youngerman. I'm going to write his name in the chat. Yeah, he's a Surinamian a Dutch artist. He represented Holland in the 2019 Venice Biennale, I believe that was that one. And he had a major exposition in the De Stijl Museum here in Holland, in Amsterdam. I believe that for me, that's a major thing. It's a major thing to be able to give an artist from that historical background, culture, that kind of prominence in the country, such as this one, is a really great thing. And he's a great guy and an amazing artist.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I think we are down to the final two images. This may be the last. Okay, so we had Opus X. Let's go back, Matt. Let's go back to the prior. I'd love to hear about this, and then we'll hear about the next one.
I mean, Opus X was made before Restart, and with this painting, again, in musical terms, the notion of opus and how that comes to speak about the oeuvre, a musical oeuvre, or a space of production accomplishment, and then X, and the X was this purple space, literally this purple space. in my paintings, when I'm making them, I mix my colors beforehand and have a situation of placing them in different, planning them, mapping them throughout the painting in different ways. And then as the painting develops, I'm changing these colors if they're not working properly for me or for what I feel in the sense of how the painting should work. I'm sometimes changing the tonality or the richness or the brightness or dullness of a color depending on how much I want to enhance the type of space I'm seeing. And then there are colors that are not planned. I go into the painting, working through the painting with no idea what the color would be in certain spots of the painting. And that for me is exciting. It brings in a lot of the learning I gained from working with expressionist teachers in my undergraduate experience, just the sense of bringing the unknown to play. And I think that that's an important thing. It's not only an expressionist thing. You can see it in Duchamp and in many great artists that exist. The idea of dealing with and engaging the unknown or the X. And I also like this notion of the X as it relates to, say, Malcolm X or people of color or the other. So the X becomes many different things in as much as it plays into the culture and the identification of the unknown or the identification of a person in as much as just a thing in and of itself. So this color became the color that I ended up with, and it allowed the painting to ring in this really strange way. This place that I still see every time I see it, it becomes an unexpected experience. And this is what I want to engage and have maintained in the painting, even after it's done.
Fantastic. So we are down to the final image and our final couple of minutes here. I want to thank you in advance just to say this has been a wonderful experience for me. And this is really the first time you and I have had this kind of like in-depth discussion. So it's quite I don't know the word I should use, but it's been enlightening and really, really great. So I think Matt, if we can advance to the final image.
Yeah. This
And
one
if
is,
you'd like to just share something, sure.
yeah. This one, void. And this painting is, I see it here as it's just clearly this. It's interesting to me how this painting, with all the color and all the formation, became just outlines, became a floating series of outlines with the color passing through those outlines. And the outlines, if you can see, there's a certain kind of structure, linear structure, which is essentially the swastika that I'm using in this painting. And it was coming from this flower series that I began thinking about swastika and fascism and the populism or the world populism for fascism that's going on around the world. Those paintings originated out of a certain kind of consternation and awareness of this growing sense of the popular appeal of this kind of fascistic frenzy that's happening with smaller groups growing around the world. So hence the flower painting relationship to this linear structure, hence the idea of how flowers, the bright ones in nature, are made so bright so that they can attract their prey the quickest to extinguish that prey. There is that structure here, but what we have is this painting that really, with a kind of darker color in this painting, it illuminated this linear quality that seemed to just float over the color rather than just hold the color as container. And to me, then it became almost like what the title says, that these spaces are just empty air. These spaces are void, but I'm playing with the title to almost say other things with the word and the ideas that are explored in this painting. So there's, again, this painting is not about, my paintings are not about, say, defining or answering questions in as much as bringing questions to a forefront and having one ask better, let's say, more, having the question become more precise. So that question then it helps me to then make the next painting. So bringing questions to myself, for myself, and as much as to the viewer, to be able to engage the possibilities of what they can explore in this visual experience.
Thank you so much for that. I think that this was a fantastic way for me to start my day. You're about to end your day, or maybe you're going to go out and
Right.
hang out in Amsterdam. You're going to go out and hang out in Amsterdam. You don't have to tell us, but we'll
It's
assume that there's going
it's hail. There's hail outside. I'm going to stay inside.
Okay, so the weather's not great. Well, Odili Donald Odita, thank you so much for joining us for today's open air conversation. I look forward to seeing you perhaps in the States or somewhere else in the world.
Yeah.
The Gantt Center's goal is always to provide programs that inform and inspire. The support of viewers like you allows the Gantt Center to expand its reach and further develop programs like today's open air. To learn more about the ways you can support the Gantt Center, you can visit their website at ganttcenter.org/donate. And also be sure to click the subscribe button on the screen to be updated on all future virtual programs. As always, I thank you all for joining us for Open Air, and have a fantastic night. Thank you.